Welcome to the AFR Saints channel, where we provide you daily content on your favorite team, the New Orleans Saints. Do us a favor and hit that subscribe button. Be sure to leave your comments below and smash that like button. Who dat?
I don't think you're ever where you want to be or where we need to be. We're in a race to improve, getting ready for the opener this, here in 2 weeks from today. But there's a lot of positives with this football team right now. But yet there's certainly some things we got to improve on.
Dennis Allen. Saints dropped their preseason finale to the Texans 17-14. 17-13. Had their opportunities in the game. Not a great day for Jake Haener, a really bad day for Jake Haener. A couple of bad interceptions in the ballgame. You missed a 60-yarder. Blake Gruby had the leg. My goodness. They said on the broadcast it would have been good from 68. But nonetheless, Saints fall in their regular season finale. Now all eyes point to Tuesday when the first 53 cut downs come. And I would say that because I know everyone always says it's the final 53, but it's you're going to hear me say this today and tomorrow and this whole week. Every single year when cut down day comes and teams have to trim their roster to 53, there are always guys that make the team, and then a day later, they're cut. Because you're going to look around the league and 31 other teams are going to cut 40-some-odd players, and you're going to have over 1,000 free agents hit the market like that in a day, and somebody is going to be a better player at a position of need for you, and you're going to sign them. So it's the first 53 that we'll get to on Tuesday. But as we sort of look at the roster, and now that training camp and the preseason are complete, what are maybe our takeaways and what we were looking for on Sunday? I'll tell you, for me personally, if I had to have a single biggest takeaway, and I know there's a lot of people that are going to point to Jimmy Graham and the day that Lucas Krull had going over 100 yards receiving, and I get it, and those were impressive, no doubt. The thing for me that was the most important and most encouraging was Bryan Bresee and Isaiah Foskey. Those are two guys, again, because you've invested so much draft capital in them. First-round pick on Bresee, high second-round pick on Foskey. You need those guys, not just to, of course they're going to make the team, but you need them to be impactful players for you. If they're not going to be starters, they at least have to be impactful parts of the rotation. And for the first time, we saw that. Foskey got his first sack. Bresee was not credited with a sack, but his disruption created a couple of sacks in that ball game. And that's what you want to see, is those guys continue to get better and better and better. As a matter of fact, here was Dennis Allen on both Bresee and Foskey in the nights that they had against the Texans.
I thought he was active in the game. I don't know what his final stats were, but I did think he was active in the game, both in against the run and with the pass rush. So I thought I saw looked like there was a couple of good things I saw at Isaiah Foskey also in the game. So we got some tough decisions that are coming up. We got a lot of good football players on this team, and we got to make some decisions over the next 48 hours.
Look, you don't have a decision to make on Foskey and Bresee. We know that. By the way, this was the call on Fox of Foskey's sack.
Pressure on Mills, and he is sacked. Got sandwiched back there and nowhere to go. Isaiah Foskey, the rookie, got there first.
Boy, that was great to hear. It was great to see Isaiah Foskey make an impactful play, because you got to, and I get it, it's against backups and guys that are going to be looking for a job on Tuesday, but you'd rather see that than not, right? I mean, that's the other side of it, is we go back 2 weeks to the first preseason game, and Foskey and Bresee didn't record a statistic against backups, and you're like, what gives? But Dennis Allen talked about Isaiah Foskey's progression throughout this training camp.
I think he's getting better, yet he's still a rookie and still has a long way to go. But he's made significant strides from where he was, in OTAs and even the first part of training camp. So, and look, that's what you want to see. You want to see a guy that every time he gets an opportunity to go out there and get more reps, you see a guy that's getting more comfortable in what we're asking him to do. Okay,
so the other side of the line is we got to talk about Andrus Peat. Muse just audibly oofed. Dude, it was rough. mean, he was bad.
He blocked his own player at one point.
He did. He did that. And in the worst part about it for Pete, I'm not here to pick on Andrus Peat. But it's the nature of the fact in the NFL is that these are jobs and every roster spot is valuable. And Andrus Peat, at this point in his career, at almost 30 years old, and a guy that was a former first-round draft pick and a guy that's been, even if it was by default, a Pro Bowler 3 times, this is a guy that was playing meaningful snaps in the final preseason game because he's trying to win a roster spot because that is not locked up. I mean, he was going to be a cap casualty this year. They were going to cut. Remember when the Saints were over the cap? It was the Saints in Tampa. No team had less cap space than those two, and they had to rework a lot of contracts. Well, one of the guys that was going to be a cap casualty was Andrus Peat. And not only did they restructure his deal, and that wasn't just, hey, let us save some money, move some cash. That was a restructure and a pay cut. It's like, you will take this pay cut or we are cutting you. So you look at the way that they structured Pete's deal, and he took a pay cut, but if they trade or release him, if he was designated as a post-June 1st trade or release, the Saints save $1.5 million against the cap. And I'm not sitting here trying to tell you that that's going to be some exorbitant savings. Next year, the dead number is $13.6 million. So, that's going to be on your books next year no matter what. But whether he's on the roster this year or not. But you could save $1.5 million if Pete doesn't make the team this year. And the bottom line is, if I asked you objectively, who is a better option for you at left guard today, is it Andrus Peat or is it James Hurst? The answer unanimously is going to be James Hurst. He is a objectively better player right now than Andrus Peat, and he's more valuable because he's been starting at left tackle for you the last 2 years and can become a swing player for you and play outside if you need him to. So there's more value in Hurst than there is in Peat. So Andrus Peat having that kind of day probably is getting cut. At this point, I don't know that I see a path for him because you're going to keep Nick Saldiveri. You used a 4th-round pick on him out of Old Dominion this year. You're going to keep Hurst, who I think is going to be the starter. And then the real question is, who's the next idea? You keep Throckmorton. Ruiz is probably your backup center if something happens to McCoy. I don't know that I see a spot for Andrus Peat on the line, which in some respects is disappointing because he is a former first-round pick and all, but everybody's run comes to an end. And in part, this is because of the emergence, too, of Trevor Penning, who did not play yesterday, although a lot of us were thinking, it was a generally accepted thought that Trevor Penning needs the reps and that he was going to play in this game, but he didn't, and Dennis Allen explained why after.
I think we've seen some improvement out of him, and I think where we're at right now with where he is, and then, you kind of take into account that, last year in the preseason, in the last preseason game, he was injured, so I felt good about where he was at and didn't want to risk putting him out there.
Penning is going to be your starting left tackle. I don't think Andrus Peat is going to make this team. If I were to give you a couple of other highlights coming out of the Texans loss, or lowlights, just observations, put it to you that way. Jake Haener was bad. There's just no other way to say it. He had a couple interceptions. He was, let me get the final box score. It was 18 of 36, I believe. Hang on, I have it right here. His final number was, he was 17 of 38, So 17 of 38 for 172, no touchdowns, 2 picks, and they were bad interceptions too. So Jake Haener was bad. For the conversation we were having last week, when Jeff Duncan kind of floated the idea, Jameis Winston has not been very good in camp. Do you consider cutting Winston, keeping Haener with the understanding that you've got Taysom Hill on the roster as an emergency quarterback as well that could shift back? I think that idea is washed after Sunday. You can't trust Jake Haener as your backup quarterback in the NFL. And when you've got a guy like Jameis Winston, which I think this was always the idea anyway, Jake Haener is going to make the team. You didn't draft him where you did to cut him. He's going to make the team, like Ian Book made the team, like Garrett Grayson made the team back in, when coming out of Colorado State. So you got to eat up a roster spot for third quarterback, but Haener's clearly not ready. That's just very much a project at this point. I will be really interested to see what they do at place kicker, because Blake Grupe was very good again yesterday. He missed a 60-yarder, but didn't miss it by much, wide right, and he had plenty of leg on it. I know last week Peter King floated the idea of trading Will Lutz to Denver. That's clearly coming from Sean Payton, because Sean Payton and Peter King are close. So if Peter has something about Sean Payton's teams, you know that's coming from Sean Payton. So are the Saints confident enough in a guy like Grupe that they could keep him and trade Will Lutz? I will remind you, this is basically what the Saints did with Blake Gillikin when they had Thomas Morstead. And it's Sean Payton's old line, the Bill Parcells' old line, where you'd rather get rid of a player a year too early than a year too late. And if you remember, I mean, Morstead's still kicking in the NFL, but they felt like they had a young guy in Gillikin who could be the guy, so they moved on from Morstead. Do they have that same conversation right now? Do they feel like they've got a guy in Blake Grupe to where they're willing to trade away Will Lutz and maybe even get an asset for him from Denver? That's worth seeing. I don't know that I have a super strong feeling on it. I'm really concerned, that Will Lutz, after the missing a year for injury, came back last year, was not very consistent. I'm concerned about Will Lutz. And Grupe looks really good. So Sand's a better option. I'd say, of course, you're keeping Will Lutz, but I think you might have as good or better option right now. And like we talked about with Andrus Peat, with respect to Will Lutz, if he's a post-June 1, which we're post-June 1, trade or release, you'd save $1.7 million. Now, I'm not saying $1.7 million is going to drive that decision, but if you are the Saints, with Pete, you cut him, you save $1.5 million. With Lutz, if you cut or trade him, you save $1.7 million. I mean, that's not insignificant. You're talking about $3.2 million. So that matters, and that could be a deciding factor in these decisions. And then lastly, how do you not hat tip Jimmy Graham? I mean, the as great as the touchdown was, the reception where he stole the ball away from like two defenders. Well, listen to it. This was phenomenal.
Winston, lofty one, Jimmy Graham, back shoulder. What year is it, Greg?
Felt like the old days, man. I mean, Jameis just throwing dimes to Jimmy. Well, not Jameis in the old days, but, Jimmy Graham wrestling away balls, high-pointing balls was awesome to see, man. So Jimmy Graham made the team yesterday. With his performance, if it was in doubt, it ain't no more. The Saints kept 4 tight ends last year, and they're going to keep 4 this year. And I know Lucas Krull had a great day, but they didn't bring Jimmy Graham, especially if he was playing like this. They didn't bring him here to not make the team if he's playing like this. If he came here and wasn't performing, that'd be one thing. But, man, that was incredible. So the Saints, that Saints tight end room right now, because with Krull, you got 5 guys that you like a lot, and you're going to have to let one of them go. But, if you cut Krull, see if he clears waivers, if you're able to re-sign him to the practice squad. But some of those questions we had are starting to crystallize a little bit now that the preseason and training camp are done, and we'll start to get those answers as we move toward Tuesday's cut-down deadline to get to 53. Hey, thanks so much for watching. Please leave your comments. I love to interact, and be sure to hit the red subscribe button below.